We've just seen in action the nested if. That gives you the ability to check more than one criteria at once by nesting one if statement inside another if statement inside another if statement up to a level of 64 ifs. Now, as you can imagine, that would get really quite messy if you wanted to check a lot of criteria. Here is the example we used before. If B2, which is my math score, is greater than K3, which is my math pass rate, comma, so assuming I've passed my math, then we ask if the history score is greater than the history pass rate, and if that's the case, then that's a pass. Now that's checking two scores, so we're looking at a double if, one nested if inside another. What would happen if there were 3 scores or 4 scores or 5 scores that required you to have a pass before you could actually get the grade pass? That would make our if statement really very messy. An alternative is to use an AND function inside the if statement. Let's see how that might work in our example here. So we'd say equals if, because we're still checking a criteria. Now the logical test then has an AND within it. Now the AND is a function that can check multiple criteria. And if those criteria are true, so if they're all true, then we can carry something out. So we can say AND, open brackets. Notice how Excel helps us out by color coding our second set of brackets as red. So my first logical test is whether the math score is greater than the math pass rate. And because I know I'm going to replicate this formula, let's do the $in up now. Then I put a comma, and I can ask a second criteria. Well, that's whether my history score is greater than my history pass rate. Again, let's $that up because we know we're going to replicate the formula. And then I close my AND criteria, my AND little function. And it's going to check these two criteria, and they both must be true. Hence the reason for the AND. Now, if they both happen to be true, the result of the function will be true. And then I can say value if true. Well, that's straightforward, pass. And if not true, well, I failed. Don't forget the speech marks at both sides of the text string. Notice how much shorter this whole formula is than this one here. And there's no repetition of the word fail when we fall out of the two if statements. Here we simply have one if statement, but then an AND, this part here, encompasses all of the criteria we would like to check. That's only 2 criteria. With the AND statement, you can have multiple criteria, and we could be checking 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, as many as we want really, different sets of criteria. And they would all be within the AND function, and they would all need to be true for us to then fall into the true part of our if statement. Well, let's see if this gives us the same results. So return, enter the formula, and then a little replication. And we should find the actual score, the actual result, is the same. So the same passes and the same fails exist across the board. But obviously the function is a lot shorter. If we were to then add in another subject, let's say geography, and a number of scores for each of our guys, quite a low scoring subject, but then we might find that the pass rate is quite low as well. And then we have a geography pass rate, 38. Let's just align that cell. Now to add the geography test within here, I would need to nest another if. To do it on the AND, I simply go into the AND statement to the last criteria, comma. Let's then check that the geography is greater than the geography pass rate. And don't forget the dollars to make the L4 absolute. And that's enough for me to add in a third criteria to my if statement. And then replicate for everyone to check their geography scores. And now we see the results are different. Only Sally has gained a pass by passing all 3 subjects. Everybody else has now failed by either failing one of the subjects or all 3 possibly. Now an alternative to the AND is the OR. If we go back to our first formula here we're saying AND. So that criteria, that criteria, that criteria must all prove to be true for us to fall into the true part of the if statement. If I change that AND to OR, then what we're now saying is that any one of these 3 statements can prove to be true and we will fall into the true part. That way they only have to actually pass one of the exams to get the pass score. And then we see that Mike actually is now a pass rather than a fail, and if we replicate, quite a few of them are now pass because they've passed at least one of the exams. But Fred there has failed all three. So even though there's an OR in there, none of the logical tests prove to be true. Therefore, the result of the OR is a false, and we drop into the false part of the if statement, and the poor lad gets a fail. So inside the if statement, we can make use of AND for checking multiple criteria that must be true, or for checking multiple criteria, one of which must be true, or at least one of which must be true. Now there is a third little operator that you can put here, which is instead of AND or you can put NOT. Now it's the same idea. It has a number of logical tests. So we'll say not this criteria, not this criteria, not this criteria. However, there is a slight disadvantage in this case to the NOT, in that it will not take multiple criteria. You can only check single logical test at a time. So you're back really to using the if, but it does have its uses from time to time. So if we say if not B2 greater than L3, so if the maths score rate is not higher than the maths pass rate, then we actually are effectively flipping the question. We need to flip the results out here. So they will be a fail if they're not greater than, or a pass if they are. And then replicate, and we find we have a few failures, but this is only looking at the maths score. So that's AND for multiple criteria that all must be true. Use the OR for multiple criteria where one of which must be true to fall into the true section. Or NOT that can only check a single criteria, but effectively it's checking that that criteria is not producing the result that you're asking for.